like to
Then
do?
let's get going then. And I think our first matter is a roll call.
Yeah, roll call.
All right. Jerry Abrams, I think has told us that he can't be with us this morning. Commissioner Dahm, Phil DeFranza,
Here.
Timothy Hodges, I believe is also unavailable this morning. Catherine McKinnon,
Here.
Commissioner Perez,
Here.
Franklin Perry, Chelsea Ross, Sarah Sanders.
Here.
We do have a quorum in attendance for the meeting.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us on this foggy morning. It was quite the mess in Middletown this morning, especially for anybody going south, but we have a pretty quick agenda today, 2 action items and several reports. Our first item is a resolution for a bond sale. Over to Hazim.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. As Sarah mentioned, we do have from finance 2 action items resolution that we would be seeking approval from the board. The first one is the resolution to authorize CHFA to issue up to 200 million of the Housing Mortgage Finance Program bonds. The sale will allow CHFA to raise additional lending proceeds for about 847 first-time homebuyer. As of September 18, CHFA had an aggregate net pipeline of about 246 million. CHFA will utilize a fixed rate structure and expect to close around November. RBC is assigned as the book running manager for the bonds. And I'll be happy to answer any questions from the committee regarding the resolution.
So Hazim, this is basically just a standard bond issue, nothing special from what I can see, right?
Nothing special.
Yep. May I have a motion?
Of course, it's specials. Sarah, CHFA bonds.
Oh, AAA bonds, they are special.
There you go.
May I have a motion?
I move that we approve it,
Second it.
or that we recommend it to the board.
Any other questions or discussion on this item? Okay, then go for a roll call vote.
Jerry Abrahams, Commissioner Dahm, Phil DeFranza,
Yes.
Timothy Hodges, Catherine McKinnon,
Yes.
Commissioner Perez,
Yes.
Franklin Perry,
Yes.
Chelsea Ross,
Yes.
Sarah Sanders.
Yes.
Vote passes unanimously.
Thank you. So the next item is regarding about the finance procedure. As required by the Connecticut General Statute, CHFA adopted and maintains procedures in connection to its operations. From time to time, CHFA will seek approval from its board to amend its various procedures for operational and/or programmatic purposes. The finance procedures was last revised in April 2013. Due to the financial market and operations have evolved since the last revision, CHFA is seeking approval to amend its finance procedures, primarily to restate certain sections for clarity and to incorporate new financing vehicles for CHFA's consideration. Once the resolution is approved by the board, CHFA will post the amendment for public comment. In summary, we made changes or clarification to the sections relating to the finance. For Section A, on the bonds, we basically expanded the borrowing vehicle to include non-bond and to allow for the incorporation of a new indenture. The next one was the clarification regarding the adoption of the CHFA's budget, where we added December 1 as the due date and expanded the definition to include the investment trust account, which is the ITA, and the opportunity fund that was established a few years ago. in regards to the section relating to the external auditor, we included deadlines by adding February 1 for the audit plan and May 1 for the audit result. For the financial advisor, we expanded the coverage to ensure that the advisor also would provide services to cover non-bonds and secondary markets. We made clarification on the next section regarding bond underwriters in terms of the roles for senior and co-managers. And then we did a few administrative cleanups for bond counsel, outside counsel, and the required disclosures for investment services contracts and finder's fee. And we established a new section in the finance procedures where we are now instituting a section that would allow CHFA to enter into a contract with broker-dealers that will help CHFA, and where the broker-dealers will act as an agent or intermediary in connection with selling bonds or securities. I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have regarding the proposed amendment to the finance procedures.
I had a question on the broker-dealer new section.
Yes.
So I know all quasis are required to RFP their major services by statute, the auditor, financial advisor, underwriter, and bond counsel every 3 years, right? But for the broker-dealer, you don't have that requirement. Is that because you don't think it's some of these broker-dealer services that you're looking at, you don't think those are covered by the statute requiring an RFP every 3 years?
So we will perform an RFP. We may have not said it in there, but we would perform an RFP. So there will be a corresponding procedures relating to the administrative aspect of CHFA, where we define in terms of when we should, as an organization, pursue an RFP. But from the finance side, we would perform a RFP for the broker-dealer to ensure that when we put forth and are looking for such services, we are getting all the required information and targeting the qualified firms to respond.
Because right now it says the authority shall procure such services on an as-needed basis with assistance from the FA. And, you know, we do that here sometimes for specialized services. We have our FA go out and get bids from qualified firms, and it's
Correct.
not a full-blown RFP, but it's it is still a competitive process. And I assume that's what you're kind of saying here, which is not unusual for these kind of more narrow services. But when you say placement agent, that could be a big role. That could be a private placement of a large bond sale, right?
Yeah, so what generally happens when we use a placement agent is because we are looking to directly place our issuance with a qualified institutional buyer, such as the Federal Home Loan Bank. And from time to time, the Federal Home Loan Bank, they would like to know how they will get the bond. So since it's not placed through the typical primary market, we would then utilize a placement agent. And in the past, we have used our custodian, US Bank, to act as the placement agent. So that's just one example. But generally,
What if you chose to do a large private placement, which are done? Would you go to one of your underwriters under the underwriter section?
yes.
Okay, that makes sense. And then remarketing agent, you know, that's for variable rate bonds. And my understanding of the current market is the bond underwriter wants to be the remarketing agent for their own issuance.
And that's what we have done.
And it works better. I understand.
Yes, yeah, they like to market their own credit.
Well, I'm just trying to think, you know, my reading this implies there isn't a competitive process, and in some cases it might not make sense to have a competitive process. I guess I'm okay with that. I'm just trying to think. The authority shall procure such services with assistance through a review of each firm's qualification and reputation. I guess that implies you're looking at more than one firm. But you do, I guess you said that you think this does fall under the statute. I don't know, just maybe a little more recognition of that this isn't bypassing that, if you don't think it is. What's your reaction? Do you think this is fine the way it is? Just, it implies that it will be somewhat competitive?
So the statute requires that we do an RFP for underwriting services. So the concept of broker dealer from time to time, because the term itself is very broad.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain services such as when we would like to sell package securities that consists of our underlying loans. So those are not quote unquote underwriting per se. It is more or less trying to find a buyer. So we have a few things where it does fall under that category. But the intent here was we have a section on bond underwriters, and for bond underwriters, they do have liability that they carry whenever that they underwrite the bonds or are unable to place our bonds with investors. So we do have a contract with senior and co-managers. Then we were trying to make clarification and expand to allow us to help build market our bonds. So right now, the way that we have been doing so is to establish a selling group, and then we added it to the RFP along with the authorization when we, select and appoint the syndicate. However, selling group is not really part of the underwriting. So they don't have any liability, and then they are not promised to get any bonds whatsoever.
Yeah. And it goes to that last sentence, firms approved as bond underwriters.
Yeah.
Makes it
So the intent was in terms of this broker dealer, we were trying to do many things, and then trying to capture a segment of the market that we currently don't have access to just because the way we are structured.
I guess I'm still confused whether or not these services of placement agent, escrow agent, remarketing agent are required under the statute to have an RFP. I'm not sure they are, because the statute talks about underwriting. And these are different ancillary kind of services. But I assume your counsel looked at this and feels this all complies with statute in terms of those requirements.
Madam Chair, the statute talks about financial, legal, bond underwriting, and other professional services. So we certainly can add language about doing an RFP, saying that Hazim says we're going to be doing one, just to clarify.
Yeah, we will be doing it. I think that Sarah, you did see in terms of how we've been doing, and you mentioned that we will be working with our financial advisor whenever that we go about procuring this specialized services. So there will be that action taken by CHFA. It's just a matter of like what kind of RFP are we talking about then?
Because as we said, in the case of a remarketing agent, it really makes sense to just use the firm that's the underwriter for the variable rate securities, and
right, maybe
an RFP doesn't make sense there, and so forth. But Commissioner Perez, you have a question?
Yes, I have a couple of questions and one suggestion. And the first comment I'll make is, in general, I have no issues with any of these recommendations, but I would like some clarification so I understand what I'm going to be voting on. Currently, right now, what is the process for the audit? they have to have the plan by when, and the audit by when? I'm
The-
addressing
the,
the
the,
February 1 and the May 1.
the audit.
Yeah.
So the big picture for our bond resolution, we're required by the SEC to post an audit within 180 days. Within our general resolution itself, it does have requirements about making sure that the audit will be available between 120 days and 150 days. So the establishment of the February 1 and the May 1 is more to do with how we have been engaging our external auditor, and then from there turning around and issuing the audit. So as you know, we would bring and ask the auditor to present the audit plan at the January meeting. So that's how the February 1 came about. And then the audit is typically released by the April board meeting, and that's how the May 1 came about.
So this is basically putting in the procedures what we current practice.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Again, this is a clarification. Now, here is the big suggestion, or the problem was going to cause some discussion. As you know, as the banking commissioner, I'm very concerned about entities and CRA. And some of your underwriters can be banks. And we had this issue a couple of years ago with West Fargo.
Correct.
And even though the board voted to annul it, I thought the board didn't have the right to do that. And I was assured by my attorneys that if I were to challenge them in court, the board would be required to follow state law. State law says that if a bank fails CRA, I am supposed to notify the treasurer and the towns, in January, and we're supposed to stop doing business with them going forward, right? And we did it, and we actually took a vote, which I think was an illegal vote, but that's a different argument. But since we're updating the policies, the excuse that was used is our policy doesn't say that we need to do that. And when we put it out to bid, we didn't say that that was an issue that could prevent you, which again, I will argue that nothing we do can overrule a state statute. So should it make sense that we put something here for underwriters and those where CRA is applicable, obviously, because, they cannot have failed CRA.
So let me just explain one thing about the procedures. So the procedures is akin to a regulation. So they set forth what we should do administratively in terms of how we should run our programs and operation. So the intent of the section relating to bond underwriters is to explain to the public, this is how we go about selecting bond underwriters, and how we choose them. Now,
Correct. And shouldn't say that we part of the
Right.
procedure is that we're not going to somebody who's breaking the law.
I understood. Then you have the execution. So the execution is when we do the RFP, and then we include language within the RFP where we basically says that, you have to be qualified, and that you have to perform certain services, and you cannot be A, B, C, D, E, which may include the section or the point that you made, Commissioner, about if you don't pass CRA or you are this one, CHFA has the right to take you out. So we do have that language in already. Then we have the next item, which is the resolution itself, where we then present our recommendation to the board, a list of firms that we believe are in fact qualified as of the date that we made the evaluation. That's not to say they are qualified throughout the engagement. So if in an event that during the engagement period, which is generally 3 years, And if we find them, they are not performing to CHFA standards, then we can yank them and then put them in a penalty.
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying if we do a RFP or a RFQ for list of underwriters,
Yep.
as of the day that the board approves it, everybody's fine, nobody's failed CRA, but a year later, and that's what 3-year list, a year later, they did fail, we still gonna do business with that entity? That really makes no sense to me. We should never, the statute says government entities, including quasi, and don't ask me for the statute side, the lawyers can look that up. But there's a standard language, is we all expected to do business within the law of the state of Connecticut, and not with somebody who breaks the laws of the state of Connecticut. So maybe we need to change that. Look, I'm bringing this up because I don't want it. The likelihood that an entity failing CRA is very low, right? And the likelihood that we're going to have that issue again in the next 3 to 5 years is very low, in my opinion. But if we ever have it again, I mean, I don't want you guys to use some technicality that is really not legal, and that if I would have to challenge it, in my opinion, you would have lost. And the only reason I didn't, because like the governor's office pointed out to me, you realize that who you'll be suing is the chairman of the board, who happens to be your colleague, who happens to work for us. So if there's a real big issue, we need to figure it out internally. And in this case, you know, West Fargo is giving us $150 million to do housing, and we're going to work with them.
Right.
You can vote whatever you want to, but you know, and I could have chose to still gone to court, but you know, there's consequences for that.
Yeah,
I can say that the statute actually says that banks that fail at CRA status are not allowed to hold any public deposits. And so here at the Treasury with the Wells Fargo thing, we
Right.
exited any deposits with Wells Fargo. But on review of what happens in a bond sale transaction, our counsel anyway felt that that didn't actually fall under the statute. We nonetheless did not allow Wells Fargo to have a senior manager role. We did allow them to co-manage. But I just want to say, I think the statute is specific as to public deposits, which may not include bond underwriting specifically.
Well,
We also could write into our agreement with the underwriters, this concern, Commissioner Perez. That if
yeah, I
something
mean,
happens
that's what
out
I'm
there-
the point I'm trying to make. I
Yes,
mean,
we can do that.
because you know, one of the reasons you will fail CRA is for those who do estate planning and securities, is if you're not, you know, if the SEC comes after you, right, and or a bank, whether it's federal regulator in the case of West Fargo, because it had nothing to do with that the rating, or state regulator says you're violating other federal laws that may not necessarily always be in deposits. And if that's the case, I mean, it's easy enough to go back and change the law. But the idea here is not to do business with somebody who's breaking the law. It's like lawyers. I mean, we shouldn't do business with any lawyer that's been barred in another state.
yeah, I think I like Terry's idea that, you know, we can, because once the board approves the appointment, each firm is required to enter into a contract with CHFA to memorialize the engagement. So we can definitely make it clear in that agreement that if in an event something happens, you know, we will automatically do what's required.
Or we could give him, you know, obviously we should give him, a chance to explain why it doesn't apply to them, right? But assuming that it does, we shouldn't do business with people who are taking advantage of, opening up accounts for people without them knowing, right? And reporting, and then charging them fees without disclosing it and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's not the kind of entity you want to do business in any way, shape, or form. Well, I appreciate that. That was my question and the point I wanted to make. Has to be consistent.
And then Sarah, just to double back, we can include the wood RFP. If that would at least.
Well, I don't want to tie your hands into doing RFPs for things that are ancillary services that it might not make sense for if it's not required by the statute. I was just questioning, you know what I mean? So I'm not really looking to tie you into as we talked about, remarketing agent may not make sense.
Right.
A placement agent for those other securities you mentioned is always US Bank. I'm trying to think of how to. So I'm open to, if you feel comfortable, I'm open leaving it the way it is. Maybe insert, well, maybe each firm's experience, qualification, and reputation. Maybe qualified firms, experience, qualification, and reputation. So that might allow for a more expedited review for services that aren't really conducive to a RFP.
Right.
Any other discussion? May I have a motion?
I'll move.
Second, with the understanding of what Terry suggested.
Yeah, okay. With two tweaks I
Alright.
think we talked about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Any more discussion? A roll call vote?
Jerry Abrahams, Commissioner Daum, Phil DeFranza.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Phil DeFranza,
Yes.
Timothy Hodges, Catherine McKinnon,
Yes.
Commissioner Perez,
Yes.
Franklin Perry,
Yes.
Chelsea Ross,
Yes.
Sarah Sanders.
Yes.
The vote passes unanimously.
And now we have reports. Our first report is the state auditor's report from Hazin and Pasquale.
Okay, so I first want to apologize to the committee if you downloaded and reviewed the memo prior to today, because I realized that somehow we accidentally did not attach the auditor's report to the memo. So now it is attached. So if you refresh your screen, you should be able to see it in case you're wondering what this whole memo is all about. So the state auditor performed its review for the calendar year 2020 and 2021, and they released the report on July 25th, which was the same week as the board meeting. So we didn't have a chance to provide color to the committee. However, we now have a representative from multifamily, Pat Giuliano and Wendy Morse, and then they are going to provide you with additional information regarding the one finding that was stated by the auditor's report. So, Wendy.
Good morning. So the state auditors reviewed 3 of the 20 limited equity cooperatives for compliance and found that 1 was completely in compliance, 1 had not submitted the annual audit, and 1 had not submitted any of the required reports. So when required documents aren't submitted, the CHFA asset managers will send a delinquency notice that gives a 30-day deadline to comply. And if they are still not in compliance, they receive a non-monetary default notice, and then they're added to our watch list. We acknowledge that consistent follow-up was not evident for at least 1 of the LECs. So prior to this finding, our team was already working with the LEC portfolio properties. That was one of our goals for this year. And the asset management team had been reviewing all of the applicable documents and regulations and statutes for the LEC program. As noted in the report, the documents are numerous, especially if the LEC has received additional state funding for capital needs. And just to note, when the LECs were first created, training was offered to the members by the state. And over time, as the co-op members have changed, the co-ops are supposed to continuously train new members on the requirements. But what we found is this has not happened as it should for some of the LECs at least. So now we're in the process of documenting the requirements for each LEC, meeting with the members and providing guidance. We are also confirming the reporting due dates that are in our database and working on enhancements to the database to ensure we consistently follow up when the submissions are not received. Of the 20 LECs in the portfolio right now, about half of them are on the watch list. The majority of the LECs do submit the annual budget and quarterly financials, but the annual financial statement is the most challenging document because it's expensive, and we're working with all the LECs to bring them into compliance with these requirements. Are there any questions that I can answer?
I have a question. So help me again understand what happened. I understand the procedures you're changing. So was it that we have procedures, but we didn't follow the procedures? Meaning, at least in one case, that's what I kind of heard. Meaning we have procedures, and at least in one case, we didn't follow up and whether or not we got the report.
Yes, Commissioner. So in that particular case, it was an underperforming employee who has since left the organization.
That's going to be my next question. Do we know why the employee didn't do it? Because remember, we have had issues in the past where people are related to people we work with, and some things don't go the way it's supposed to.
Right now,
Not
no,
that question of anybody, but that's what we have procedures.
yeah, that wasn't the case here, Commissioner. The person in question was an underperforming employee, not just for this particular instance, but in many instances, and that's why he's no longer with us. We've taken a lot of precautions moving forward. Wendy and I feel that the LECs haven't been properly attended to over time, and even before this report came in, starting as far back as last November, we started to put a little bit more effort and a little more focus on these LECs because they are small properties run by LEC members, and in most cases, they don't have a whole lot of experience in how to run these properties and what's required of them. So we've been doing a much more hands-on approach in terms of management of these assets, including we've added some triggers to our database so that when documents are due, when reports are due to us, it will be held within the database, and we can track it better.
Who's the person speaking? Because I don't recognize the voice, and I can't see in my screen.
It's Pat Giuliano.
It's Pat.
Who?
Pat Giuliano.
Okay, hi. Look, I'm happy about procedures, but again, procedures aren't as good as people enforce them and people who are in charge to make sure they follow. And if I understand correctly, the procedures don't say if you're small, it doesn't apply to you, right? So even if they're small, we should hold them accountable to it. If they want our money, they got the rules go along with the money. And that would be my editorial comments. I have no sympathy that they're small. They knew what the rules were. They took the money to kind of follow the rules. And remember, and so you would know, I'm a regulator, so I think like a regulator.
Sure, Commissioner, I completely agree with you. And that's the standard that we are now holding these LECs to. We also have to make sure that we provide them the education and understanding of what the requirements are and how to provide it to us. So we are working to re-educate the 20 remaining LECs so that they're in a position to perform to our requirements going forward. But I completely agree with you. No matter how small, if you take our money, you abide by our rules.
Right. The rules don't say if you're small, you got the right lobbyists or whatever, you don't follow the rules, And the solution is real easy. It's this thing called Google accountants. Hire an accountant to do it for you. I might even suggest a CPA.
I've seen a lot of these deals over the years, these LECs, and I think there was a fatal flaw in the original legislation that assumed, a group of people would regularly raise their carrying charges to anticipate future expenses. And I don't know how many original LECs there were, but I suspect that the 276 units are only a fraction of what was originally developed. And I think as Wendy was saying, what happened was it's one of these programs that seemed like a good idea at the time, but you have people who are enthusiastic about becoming part of this LEC, and then they've left, other people have moved in, I think I would suspect a lot of people that live in the LEC think it's more like living in an apartment. And so I think a big issue here was sort of the concept, the original concept. And a lot of these were small too. So you've got a 6-unit limited equity co-op, one person stops paying their carrying charges. Um, it's devastating to a co-op. And then you have to pay $10,000 for an audit. So, I think you have to look at the original legislation too.
Well, is it true that you have to pay for an audit, or you just have to provide financials, which is not an audit?
No,
Because
they
I mean,
need-
I agree, we should not have those small entities spend $10,000-$15,000 on an audit.
We
When
are-
it's not the sophistication of the document, of the financial documents doesn't require that. And I also remind the board of the committee that the outcome of us not doing this and now wanted to say we need to change the law is what's happened in the last few years. We end up hurting the same people we're trying to help because we end up having to take this and refinance it and spend a lot more money because the people that took our money originally didn't follow the rules, and we didn't make sure they followed the rules. Whether it was in maintenance, whether it was the monthly fee, whether it was whatever. The law doesn't say if you're only 2 units, or if you're only 20 units, that the rules are different. And the consequences of not following that is we're going to end up having to take it over eventually. Or another developer will come in and take it over, and we'll have to pay for the sins of the ones prior to that because we didn't hold them to the law. I mean, we may have to simply have to agree to disagree. But I think it's a good law to require some responsibility on those people who take our money. And by those people, I mean people that take our money, not any other, meaning of the word. If not, I mean, what happens is we end up paying for it twice.
I had a question. So these are the state auditors, not our external auditors that we hire. And I know they do a review every 2 years, and it's kind of lagged. So this was for 20 and 21, and we're familiar with that here as well. But what has been the record for CHFA with state auditors? Have you had findings on prior 2-year audits? If anyone knows,
We,
Look, having one finding is exceptionally good.
yeah,
And I think in the case of CHFA, and I seem convinced to that, it's typically nobody that don't have any,
yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So the one that I do remember was the one that when I first came to CHFA back in 2014, when the auditor was questioning the what do you call that, the payment that was made, the severance payment that was made to a prior CHFA employee. So that came out back in 2014. But beyond that, in terms of operational matters, we have been clean.
great. Any more questions on that report? Let's go to financial reports, Allison Murphy.
Good morning. Before you are the August financial reports. On the revenue side, mortgage loan and investment interest revenue are coming in 11.8 million above budget for the current year and 33.2 million higher than prior year. The revenue variances continue to be driven by an increase in interest rates on the authority's short-term investments. To give you an example, the average stiff rate for January through August of last year was less than 1% and actually came in at 0.845% compared to the average stiff rate through August of this year, which was almost 5%. On the expense side, bond interest expense is 1.4 million below budget through August and is 23 million higher than prior year. We continue to see the same drivers behind these variances. Our outstanding bonds are 281 million higher than the same time last year. And additionally, our interest rates on our variable rate bonds have also increased compared to last year. Administrative expenses are coming in 4.4 million below budget and 1.8 million higher than prior year. When you exclude salaries and benefits of 19.4 million, our year-to-date expenses are 294,000 higher than last year. And lastly, our change in net position is above target by 16.6 million through August. Are there any questions?
If there's no questions, let's go to production and delinquency report. John Chilson.
Good morning. For the month of August, the authority purchased 175 loans, single-family loans, a total of $43.4 million, of which 132 loans totaling $30.3 million were securitized, or about 3/4 of the August production. The remaining 43 loans totaling $13.1 million were whole loans. The average loan size for August was $248,000. The month-end mortgage-backed security balance was $2.4 billion, an increase of $16.5 million over July. The whole loan portfolio through July declined by 22 loans. However, the mortgage loan portfolio balance increased by $1.7 million, ending in the month of July at $1.1 billion. The carrying balance of loans in foreclosures year over year declined by $11.3 million to $14 million, while the number of loans in foreclosure decreased year over year by 96. The overall delinquency rate for the single-family portfolio was 1.62%, which was 5 basis higher than in June. For the month of August, the authority also funded 236 down payment assistance loans totaling $3.9 million, with an average borrowing of $16,600, and an additional 242 time to own forgivable loans totaling $7.4 million, with an average loan size of $30,700. There were no new loan closings in our multifamily portfolio in August. The overall portfolio remained unchanged at 561 loans totaling $1.34 billion. Our permanent loan and construction loans delinquency were also unchanged from the prior month, with 7 permanent loan delinquencies and 1 construction loan delinquency. And the multifamily overall delinquency rate was less than 1%. Any questions?
I have a question. It's Phil DeFranco. You mentioned your delinquencies was 1.8% or
1.62. 1.62.
I read on the report that you sent us that the performing loans were 94.98%.
There's actually we look at it in 2 different ways. We look at it, the whole loan portfolio standing on its own was a 4%, but then we look at it combined with our mortgage-backed security portfolio, given overall delinquency exposure to our single-family portfolio, and that's the 1.62%.
So the overall, all the loans that CHFA services, the average delinquency is 94. The average performing is 94.98. I was just trying to, okay. So the 1.8 is just, explain that to me again.
We like to look at it the 2 ways. So because our portfolio consists of both the mortgage-backed securities secured by the single-family loans, and then the whole loan portfolios that we have. And the whole loan portfolio is uninsured, where our mortgage-backed security portfolio balance is 100% insured. Well, I should correct myself. The single-family portfolio, about 3/4 of our loans are FHA loans, which are 100% guaranteed.
Okay. So basically it's a 5% delinquency overall in all of the entire products.
No, actually, the overall entire of all our single-family exposure is 1.6. Our whole loan portfolio, the loans that we hold on our portfolio, it's the 4%.
Okay. Or it's actually 5%. It's 94.98.
Right, yeah, closer to 5. Yeah, you're right.
So what determines like what you're gonna hold and what you're gonna securitize? Is it just like?
Yeah, our current strategy is if it complies with a Fannie Mae or Ginnie Mae or Freddie Mac
You saw it.
requirements, guidelines, then we securitize it.
Okay.
If for some reason
Okay.
it doesn't, then we put it in our whole loan portfolio.
How does the total delinquencies compare to other HFAs?
You know, there and that second page, or actually page E, you'll see in that delinquency schedule I think you're referring to the right, we included a comparison to the to Connecticut, to New England, and
Okay, I
to
can
the
see that.
national.
Okay.
And we compare, it's fairly consistent.
Okay. Okay.
We're
Yeah. All right. And then I guess my last question would be, do you break out the determination of delinquencies based off of the down payment assistance program and the non-down payment assistance programs?
we haven't recently,
Because quite honestly, at a delinquency rate as a total with at 100% loan to value program, it's mind-boggling how good it is. So, I mean, I'm just curious, like if you saw much more delinquencies in the 100% finance loans.
we did. I mean, we looked at it. It was a good number of years ago, but the last time we looked at it, it was just about double. So there was it's twice as likely that a down payment assistance backed loan would be delinquent than a non-DAP loan.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's it.
Sure.
Any other questions on the report? Hearing none, our next item is approval of the minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee meetings on July 27th. May I have a motion? To accept?
Move to accept.
Thank you.
Okay,
Second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Roll call vote.
Jerry Abrahams, Commissioner Dahm, Commissioner, I'll come back to you. Phil DeFranzo,
Yes.
Timothy Hodges, Catherine McKinnon,
Yes.
Commissioner Perez,
Yes.
Franklin Perry,
Yes.
Chelsea Ross,
Yes.
Sarah Sanders,
Yes.
Commissioner Dahm, can we hear you now? Okay, the vote passes unanimously.
Is there any other matters or any other questions or comments anyone has before we go?
So Sarah, before we go, I just want to double back regarding the procedures. So just want to be clear, one of the things that we were stewing over regarding the section relating to broker dealers. Are you okay if we put the word "or"? Because the idea would be that depending to the services that CHFA requires, we may either utilize the assistance of the financial advisor or the issuance of the RFP. Because again, we're now trying to determine whether or not such services falls under the statute or not. So that would provide us with the opportunity to evaluate depending to the services. So it will be the responsibility of CHFA to determine which one we should go with.
I think that's a good resolution because I have a feeling a couple of those don't really fall under, and I don't want to hold you to a process, a time-consuming process that's not needed or warranted or makes sense. So I like
Okay.
it. Yeah.
And
But
then,
yeah.
Well, Commissioner Perez, just want to make it clear too, we're not changing anything in the procedures for the bond underwriters, but we are recording it in the minutes that we would incorporate the comments that we discuss in the underwriter's contract.
It's fine with me.
Okay. And then lastly, I just wanted to let the community know, on September 14, I attended a Securities and Exchange Commission meeting and had the opportunity to speak to the Public Finance Abuse Unit staff, which is the municipal securities enforcement arm of the SEC. So they extended the invitation to me because they wanted to hear from the issuer's perspective regarding our disclosure and our interaction with investors, with bond counsels, with bond underwriters, and municipal advisors. In attendance were the SEC lawyers, SEC investigators, and analysts. We had a good discussion. I told them what was working and what wasn't working. So just wanted to at least let everyone knows about that.
So just to make clear, they had no concern with your disclosure. They were just tapping you as an expert for feedback.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Someone who works with the SEC on a regular basis, because we regulate securities in Connecticut, meaning the Department of Banking. That's an honor.
Yep.
Yeah, even when they were going through the whole process of trying to get more information about me, they did ask whether or not I was a political appointee or a career employee. So they did have some review before they even said okay for me to attend.
Wow. Was it in person? I'm just curious.
And in person, there was another representative from the issuer, but he used to be a SEC lawyer, so I was on my own.
Was it in Connecticut or down in New York or?
In DC, like I was
Okay.
invited to the glass building, so
Oh,
that was
wow.
to the glass building.
It sounds like they want to poach you. This was an interview.
Oh, no.
It's not
They like lawyers. They like lawyers that specialize in securities.
Oh, got it.
Any other comments or questions or matters? Okay, with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next one.